After 9 years of this Liberal NDP Prime Minister, hunger and homelessness are up as 1 in 4 Canadians are food insecure. It's because this carbon tax scam leaves Canadians with less money in their pockets, food in their bellies, and fuel in their cars. This Prime Minister and this carbon tax scam are not worth the cost. Conservatives are calling for all federal fuel taxes to be axed this summer so Canadian families can save an average of $670. Will this road-raging finance minister stop the road trip wrecking and implement this common-sense Conservative ask? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the only thing the Conservatives believe in is austerity, and the only thing they know how to do is cut, cut, cut. That's why it is no surprise that they would like to cut the carbon rebates that are putting more money back in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians. It is no surprise that they want to cut a national school food program. It's no surprise they want to cut our national early learning and childcare plan. Mr. Speaker, they have no real plan, but they're letting the country burn.
The Honourable Member.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Forest Lawn.
No doubt we will cut the carbon tax scam that will leave more money in Canadians' pockets.
Yeah.
A food program.
I vote for that.
There's no food in it. The only thing these guys have been feeding over the last 9 years is the already obese government. What common sense Conservative governments are going to do is we're going to axe a tax for good.
Look at Pierre smiling.
Tax selection so we can show them how it's done anyways.
Pierre's loving it, eh? He's starting trends in government by calling the Liberal government an obese government.
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is incredibly disappointing to see the misleading information that the honourable member actually puts forward. It is very clear. 300 economists, the parliamentary budget officer, have said 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back. Our approach is one that actually addresses the existential threat of climate change, does so in a manner that is actually affordable for Canadians. And to be honest with you, his constituents should be asking him, I'm sure they are, why he campaigned on putting in place a price for pollution in the last election and now is actually taking such a hypocritical position.
The Honourable Member from Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Thank you, Speaker. I'll be sure and tell the people in my community that are suffering under this NDP Liberal government that a bunch of well-to-do economists and some tenured professors saying that life's never been so good. I'll make sure I tell them that. Conservatives put forward this plan. We're asking the government to axe all federal taxes on gasoline from today until Labor Day, meaning that the average Ontarian could save about $600 this summer. When will the Prime Minister adopt our common sense plan, axe the carbon tax this summer so families can take their kids on vacation?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm glad that folks in this House are finally being honest. He's actually saying, Mr. Speaker, just ignore the facts. Ignore the facts. Make it all up. At the end of the day, 8 out of 10 families get more money back. Every reputable authority actually says that. It's only the Conservatives who campaigned on the basis of putting in a price on pollution, who've now changed their mind, have no plan for climate except to let the planet burn, would take a position like that.
Hey, there you go, showing that he's a human with emotions.
From Halliburton,
that's good to see.
Speaker, the facts are food bank usage is at the highest level it's ever been, and that's because of policies by this NDP Liberal government. In fact, this summer, my community that relies on tourism is being punished because the Liberals refuse to reduce their carbon tax. Canadians can actually save money. In Ontario, approximately $600 from today until Labor Day could be saved if the Liberals reduce the tax on all gasoline. Now, Speaker, when will Liberals accept this and give Ontarians a break who just want a vacation this summer?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the pandemic, the Conservatives wouldn't have been there for small businesses and people that were suffering. No. Their response to the challenges that are around the globe is to say to people who are suffering, let's pretend those issues aren't happening in our country, and we can help you out by taking away your rebate check. We can help you out by taking away dental care from a senior, taking away a diabetic patient's medication. Mr. Speaker, you don't help vulnerable people in a time of global turmoil by cutting their essential supports. You help them by standing up and standing behind them, and that's what our government does every day.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger or the homelessness. The Calgary Herald reports of a single mother struggling to feed her family. Edith said, I pay all of the important things first: mortgage, utilities, insurance, condo fees, and then feed the kids. If I have anything left over, they can do activities. She has resorted to feeding her family at the community kitchen. Mr. Speaker, far too many Canadians are in this sad reality. When will this government axe the carbon tax, give Canadians a break, and allow families like Edith to actually feed their families?
Common sense question.
Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for the question, and I take his concerns as being sincere, but it's ironic that he puts this question on the floor of the House of Commons just hours after a debate on his leader's bill, which proposes to cut many of the supports that will help people like Edith. They put forward measures that are going to increase taxes on home construction. Their plan includes billions of dollars in cuts to support communities that are dealing with homelessness. They plan to cut the very funds that build affordable housing opportunities for families in need. Mr. Speaker, the government will continue to make the investments that will support vulnerable people in their time of need. I invite the Conservatives to join us.
The honourable member from Edmonton, Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, it's actually their failed policies that doubled the cost of housing. We would cut carbon tax and allow families like Edith to actually afford to pay for groceries. And after 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger or the homelessness. And according to the Salvation Army, 26% of Canadians are skipping or reducing their meals because they can't afford to buy groceries, and 1 in 4 Canadians are skipping meals so they can afford for their children to have food. Their out-of-control spending and the carbon tax are driving Canadians into poverty. When will they cut the carbon tax and give Canadians a break?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Communities and Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, it is disingenuous in the extreme for the honourable colleague to argue that the very measures that put more money in the pockets of vulnerable people are driving the concerns that they are experiencing now. Yet at the same time, he's putting forward a plan, standing behind his leader, who wants to make sure that we cut programs that are building affordable housing, to cut funding that's going to cities, to cut programs that are supporting vulnerable families, whether that's
but they're not working.
Child care, whether that's programs that provide dental care, whether that's programs that provide essential medicines to people in need. Mr. Speaker, it takes investments to support the vulnerable Canadians that live in our communities. We're going to make them.
Mr. Speaker, a recent report outlines the devastating impacts of the climate crisis over the next decade. We can expect ecosystems collapsing, overwhelmed, and a scarcity of vital resources. And in the face of this, the Liberals...
The honourable member from Victoria, her microphones were working at the time that she started a question. I invite her to start from the top.
Oh my goodness.
Mr. Speaker, a recent report outlines the devastating impacts of the climate crisis over the next decade. We can expect ecosystems collapsing, our emergency responses overwhelmed, and a scarcity of vital resources. And in the face of this, the Liberals keep breaking their climate promises. In fact, they're still allowing big polluters to increase their emissions. And the Conservatives can't even agree if climate change is real. The Prime Minister is meeting with his youth council. Is he going to be honest about how he is fueling the climate crisis and endangering their future?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to correct my honourable colleague. Since before the pandemic...
Doesn't he normally wear glasses, or am I tripping out?
...have one of the best performance of all G7 countries when it comes to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions since 2019, but I would agree with her. More needs to be done, which is why we have put together the National Adaptation Strategy, working with provinces, territory, Indigenous nation, municipalities to ensure that we are better prepared to help Canadians and their communities face the impacts of climate change, something, unfortunately, that the Conservative Party of Canada can't even come to mention.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger and homelessness. Mr. Speaker, a recent CBC report highlighted The reality for people living in Thunder Bay, their neighbors are having to share groceries and other essentials just to be able to get by. Now, realizing that Canadians are struggling and that their plan has received a failing grade from the Poverty Report Card, will this Prime Minister finally axe the carbon tax and stop his inflationary spending to bring home lower prices for all Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I have a hard time accepting this question from a member who I respect and believe is here for the right reasons when he puts the question in a frame of homelessness, but is willing to stand behind his leader when he proposes to cut funding that serve homeless Canadians across this country. Mr. Speaker, I never hear ideas from the Conservatives about making more investments to support vulnerable people. I never hear ideas from the Conservatives that will actually result in more homes being built. It's cut, cut, cut every step of the way. They do not want to put measures in place that will help vulnerable Canadians. We absolutely will.
Not a single person believes that.
I'm going to invite all members, please. It's been a really pretty good question period to listen to the questions and to listen to the answers, and to please listen, lend their attention to the honourable member from Kenora.
Mr. Speaker, the minister can try to deflect and deny as much as he wants, but the fact of the matter is, after 9 years, it's his government's policies that have caused hunger and homelessness to rise. Now, 1 in 4 Canadians are struggling to put food on the table. People are spending over 30% of their incomes on housing alone, Mr. Speaker. This is the NDP Liberal plan in action. How can they possibly believe that their plan is working?
They're all surrounded by yes men. They're all surrounded by each other.
Communities.
Mr. Speaker, he wants to talk about our policies on affordability. How about the Canada Child Benefit that puts more money in the pockets of 9 out of 10 families and stop sending child care checks to millionaires? Yet his party voted against it. Let's look at the change that restored the age of retirement to 65 from 67. His party voted against it. Let's look at the guaranteed income supplement for low-income single seniors increasing by up to $947. His party voted against it. Let's look at the student loan forgiveness measures for healthcare professionals that work in communities like mine. Their party votes against it. Every time they have a chance to help someone, they say no.
Mr. Speaker, this NDP Liberal government is receiving a failing grade in Newfoundland and Labrador. Back home, according to Food Banks Canada and its annual poverty report card, almost half are paying more than 30% of their earnings to house themselves. 40% are worried about feeding themselves. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger and the homelessness. So will he listen to the premiers who begged him to axe the tax so that people can feed and house themselves?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, if my honourable colleague opposite really wanted to do something for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians and all Atlantic Canadians, he'd vote to pass the fall economic statement, because that would mean $1,430 to families of 4 in his riding. That means $2,160 to family of 4 in Alberta.
She looked at them in the mirror at some point today and said,
Saskatchewan.
"This is how I want to look."
$40 to families in Manitoba, $1,300 to families in Ontario, $912 to families in New Brunswick. That's how we help Canadians.
And she thought that was a good idea.
The honourable member from Costa Bay Central, Notre Dame.
Mr. Speaker, I find that a bit rich coming from my colleague from Long Range Mountains, who voted against Bill C-251, against the sealing industry, against the fishing industry, against the people in our very own riding, Madam Speaker, or Mr. Speaker. But you know what? Back to the matter at hand here. 45% back home have an inadequate standard of living. 35% have a severely inadequate standard of living. 26% are experiencing food insecurity. So after 9 years, while this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, who's not worth the hunger and not worth the homelessness, axe the tax and listen to the premiers back home.
Kind of messed up a bit, but that's all right.
The Honourable Minister for Rural Economic Development and for COA.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what we do on this side of the House. On this side of the House, we support communities. We support businesses. So I'd love to know echo the member opposite's comment to the 181 projects that ACOA has funded in his riding that supported 64 businesses, 43 not-for-profit organizations, and he voted against every single one of those, Mr. Speaker. That's supporting businesses. That's supporting communities. That's what we do, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years as NDP Liberal government, Canadians are in trouble. On Thursday, we learned from an OSFI risk report that Canadian homeowners who renew their mortgages in 2026 will be facing a payment shock. What this means is that as of February 2024, 76% of Canadians are in jeopardy of losing their homes. After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, many Canadians are now facing the very real fact they will be losing their homes. These Liberals are just not worth the cost. Will the Liberals commit today to stopping their inflationary spending, to drive down interest rates, to make housing affordable, so that Canadians can keep their homes?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as we have been making clear throughout question period, the only thing the Conservatives want to do is cut, and actually put taxes back on home builders. That's true. But when it comes to fiscal policy...
There, she fixed her hair.
Quote,
that is funny.
Speaking last week in the other place, Canada compares rather favorably on a debt to GDP ratio when compared to G7 countries. We are probably the least or second least indebted country. Mr. Speaker, the Speaker, absolutely wrong about everything, including fiscal policy.
Just flailing her arms around like it's making a difference.
Very gently, I'd just like to ask the Honourable Member from Cumberland Colchester to please only take the floor.
Shut up, Mr. Speaker. Very gently, I'd like to remind everyone to smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet already.
My apologies. Now the Honourable Member from Northumberland, Peterborough South has the floor.
Well, in the next election, we'll let Canadians decide exactly who is wrong. And if you listen to these Liberals talk about this, you would think they never had it so good. The truth, it couldn't be any further. The fact is, we have tent cities from coast to coast. We have students who are living underneath bridges. We have workers who are living in their cars. You know what? If these Liberals won't listen to Canadians, if they won't listen to Conservatives, listen to your own regulators. Stop the spending, drive down costs, so Canadians can keep their homes.
Let the Canadians decide.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there will, of course, be a next election, and at that moment in time, Canadians will be able to look at who has the record of stepping up and supporting vulnerable people. And I can say the record of the Conservative Party of Canada in this country in standing up and fighting for vulnerable people, fighting for people who don't have homes, fighting for people who are in poverty is abysmal, Mr. Speaker, and that's just the plain facts. Every time they had a chance to stand up and fight for those that were in need, they instead turned to ancient trickle-down economics that don't work, and they'll try it all over again. People have seen the game, they know what's up, and I don't think they're going to buy it.
The Honourable Member from Peterborough Kawartha.
9 years of this Liberal NDP government, Canadians are hungry and homeless. In the Minister of Housing's own backyard, 10 people are going homeless every single week. 1 in 4 Canadians feel they don't even have enough money to live. Canadians are spending 64% of their income on housing, which under that Prime Minister has doubled. While 10 cities become normal and they gaslight Canadians and tell them they've never had it so good, Conservatives are fighting. So when will they wake up and vote in favour of our build homes, not bureaucracy bill?
There you go.
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague would like to talk about my community. I want to take an opportunity to thank the service providers at shelters like Viola's Place. I want to say thank you to our partners at Cody's Place who are benefiting from a multi-million-dollar investment to build more affordable housing. I want to say thank you to the Antigonish Affordable Housing Society for partnering with us to build more units for vulnerable families in that community. But let's take a minute to talk about her community. She goes and shows up for ribbon cuttings for projects that we have funded when she voted against them in the House of Commons. It's important that our words match our actions if we're going to solve the housing crisis. I hope the Conservatives will do the same.